Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. This video is about the Commonwealth Government's recently expressed desire to prohibit doxing and the rather appalling public consultation that the government has been holding on this subject. Now, I'll have a bit of a rant about that towards the end of this video, so those of you who are here for the rants, stay around for that one. Okay, but first let's address what is doxing. Now, originally the term comes from the shortening of the word documents to dox, D-O-X, and it referred to what was known then as dropping docs online, meaning publishing a heap of private documents that contain personal information about a person online. Now, interestingly, the Commonwealth spells doxing with a double X, which would be great for Scrabble if there were two X's in Scrabble, but apparently there's not, and therefore it does seem rather unnecessary and it does rather freak out the spell checkers. But because the Commonwealth is using a double X, I will for the purposes of this video too. Now, according to the public consultation document, doxing is defined as the intentional online exposure of an individual's identity, private information, or personal details without their consent. Now, 3 categories of doxing are given by the Commonwealth Government, and they are, first, de-anonymising doxing, and that's revealing the identity of someone who was previously anonymous. So, for example, someone who uses a pseudonym on the internet. Then you've got targeting doxing, and that is revealing specific information about someone that allows them to be contacted or located or their online security to be breached. So putting out their phone number or address online or their account username or password. Third, we've got delegitimising doxing, and that is revealing sensitive or intimate information about someone that can damage their credibility or reputation. So that might include leaking their private medical documents, legal or financial records, or the personal messages and photos that are usually kept out of the public realm. Now, originally, the government proposed to deal with doxing as part of a privacy reform by covering it in a new tort of breach of privacy. Now, this would allow a person to sue whoever publicly released information about them without their consent and then receive damages in much the same way as you could sue for defamation or for negligence. However, more recently, after a particularly controversial case of doxing, it was suggested by various politicians that it would instead be made a criminal offence. Now, for the most part, doxing is loathsome behaviour and can result in very serious damage to people. It's a way sometimes of people taking revenge against others by facilitating or encouraging other people to harass that person or threaten their security or risk their employment or their reputation. But nonetheless, before leaping into criminalising such behaviour, serious and measured thought needs to be given to the potential ramifications. In particular, there may be a good reason for revealing the identity of someone who is acting anonymously on the internet. Anonymity allows and encourages all kinds of abuse and trolling on the internet. People who operate anonymously under pseudonyms can issue death threats or threats of sexual abuse, or engage in bullying and abuse on a regular basis. They can spread lies and misinformation and defame individuals, causing both personal and societal damage. And their victims can't take action against them because they are anonymous. Unmasking them would allow their victims to report them to the police where there are threats of violence, or to sue them for defamation when they had published damaging lies about them. Should these anonymous abusers be given extra statutory protection and the security of knowing that their privacy is protected by law while they go around attacking others? Now, I would be worried if the effect of such an anti-doxing law was to protect anonymous abusers on the internet and effectively encourage them to greater extremes of abuse due to their confidence that their identity could not lawfully publicly be revealed. Doxing can be also a form of whistleblowing. It's a means of revealing criminal offences and corruption. For example, revealing the communications of a WhatsApp group that was engaged in a criminal conspiracy or tax avoidance schemes or planning a terrorist attack or swindling the NDIS or general political corruption could actually be of value to the community. If a member of such group became concerned about what was going on and decided to blow the whistle on it by exposing that criminality, the conspiracies, the corruption, where is the borderline between whistleblowing, that we seek to protect, and doxing? Many important journalistic investigations, so for example the Panama Papers, could be regarded as doxing. They literally involve the dropping of large amounts of documents into the public domain. So would journalists who reveal leaked texts, messages and communications from private messaging apps as part of an investigation into a public scandal, crimes or corruption, then be prosecuted for doxing or sued for millions for breaching someone's privacy? Now, the funny thing about doxing is that it does seem primarily to affect politicians. If you think of all the times that you have seen in the media copies of private texts or messages from WhatsApp or Telegram, it frequently involves disclosures of politicians involved in branch stacking, the misuse of government resources, influence peddling and corruption. Now, these scandals are arising more and more frequently as politicians swap from plotting in smoky back rooms to instead doing it on their phones. And this makes me wonder whether a secondary aim of any law that prohibited doxing would actually be the protection of politicians from ongoing scandals about these matters, which are fueled and substantiated by doxed messages that end up before corruption commissions quite often. Now, these days politicians use encrypted messaging services like WhatsApp and Telegram, not only for plotting against their leaders, but also for communications that would previously have been preserved in government records. And this means proper government record keeping is being bypassed, damaging the prospects of accountability through freedom of information or eventually the release of official documents by the archives. Some people have described this now as government by WhatsApp, and they regard it as a major transparency problem. Well, it is. Not only is the history that's now being written through these messages almost impossible to access officially, although actually in the United Kingdom the COVID inquiry did actually get quite a lot of them, but nonetheless they're actually pretty easy to delete, especially when politicians claim, as they did in the United Kingdom quite often, to have regularly changed their phones at different points and not backed up any of these messages. Convenient for them, but not actually good for any attempt to find out what happened when later inquiring into some kind of government conduct, like during a crisis. More importantly, significant and damaging misinformation can be spread anonymously on the internet and through private messaging apps, influencing elections and referendums and undermining the democratic process. For example, during the Voice referendum, according to an article in the Australian Financial Review, neo-Nazis, white supremacists and anti-Semitic trolls spread misleading and manipulative content about the referendum on platforms such as Telegram. Now, should we really be making laws to protect them from being exposed? Now, there's also a constitutional point here, as you would expect. So the implied freedom of political communication may come into play. Private messages amongst politicians, for example, if publicly revealed, may form the key part of a political communication that criticises the policies or the integrity of the government or those who stand for elections. So how would a court deal with a law that prohibited doxing when the prohibited action involved revealing political corruption or other forms of communication about political matters? First, if it were possible, the court would normally read down the law so that it only applied to really serious forms of doxing. Currently, some forms of doxing would already be covered by section 474.17 of the Commonwealth's Criminal Code. It makes it an offence to use a carriage service, and no, we don't mean horses and carts here, we mean phone or internet, so a service that is used for communication. So using that carriage service in a manner that a reasonable person would regard as being, in all the circumstances, menacing, harassing, or offensive. Now, in cases on similar legislation that uses the term offensive, such as Coleman and Power and Monis and the Queen, which I've mentioned in previous videos, the word offensive has been read down so that it only applies to very serious levels of offensive conduct, such as those directed at hurting identified persons and provoking unlawful physical retaliation from those persons, or those that are likely to arouse significant anger, resentment, outrage, disgust, or hatred in the mind of a reasonable person in the circumstances. A court might therefore, as a matter of interpretation, seek to confine any criminal offence to very serious acts. But if the law still burdens the implied freedom of political communication and does so for a legitimate purpose, such as protecting the privacy and dignity of individuals, then the law will only be valid if it meets the quite prescriptive proportionality test that the court applies when the implied freedom of political communication is burdened. And I've gone through that test in a number of previous videos, so I won't do it here. Now, my contribution to the public consultation was therefore to point out that not everything that could be described as doxing should be criminalised or amount to a tort, because this could have unfortunate consequences, such as encouraging and protecting anonymous online abuse, and that any law should also take into account the quite difficult proportionality test that must be satisfied to avoid a breach of the implied freedom of political communication. Now, having taken the effort to write a formal submission, I went online to the Attorney General's Department public consultation page to upload it. But then I found that I couldn't. They actually didn't want formal written submissions. Instead, they only wanted me to answer a series of what I regard as quite loaded questions aimed at getting a particular result. Now, the questions that I was asked, and I did write them down because I was so annoyed at the time, were these. How important is addressing doxing to you? How important is the strengthening of privacy protections to you? Do you think existing measures are sufficient to deal with doxing? Do you think that a proposed statutory tort for serious invasions of privacy would improve the available options for individuals who have fallen victim to doxing by enabling them to seek redress through the courts? And finally, do you have any suggestions for other options to respond to doxing? Now, if this series of questions sounds vaguely familiar to you, it might be because it rather closely resembles the part from Yes Minister, where Sir Humphrey Appleby explains how you can frame a series of questions in such a way as to achieve whatever outcome you want in a public survey. You could, for example, get completely opposite answers if you ask these questions. How important to you is the prevention of anonymous online trolling and abuse? Do you think that people who threaten violence against others, spread lies and misinformation, and abuse people online should be able to hide behind their anonymity so that they can't be exposed or prosecuted? Do you think that journalists should be prosecuted and imprisoned for exposing tax fraud, crime, or political corruption by publishing leaked texts or WhatsApp messages? And would you support or oppose government legislation that made it an offence to identify online trolls hiding behind pseudonyms and to publish leaked texts and messages that reveal crimes and corruption? Yes, I think you would get a different result if you asked those questions. Now, neither of these sets of questions is actually fair and considered, and this is my complaint here. We need to have a more sophisticated debate about doxing and what falls within its scope. And this supposed public consultation is not achieving that. The questions that were asked give no opportunity for anyone to suggest the government should be cautious in how it deals with doxing. You are only supposed to answer in a way that actually supports taking action against it. And look in particular at that question about a proposed statutory tort for serious invasions of privacy, for which, by the way, there was actually no explanation as to the detail of what the tort was, or indeed what a tort is for those people who don't have legal training. Anyway, going back to the question, it asks people whether creating this new legal cause of action, a tort, would improve options of people who have fallen victim to doxing to seek redress in the courts. Well, why bother asking the question? Because there's only one possible logical answer to it. Of course, providing a new cause of action will increase the available options for legal action because it's a new available option. But that does not necessarily mean that the government should do it, nor does it address in what circumstances an offence should apply, or what defences or exceptions should be available. The consultation, which by the way has now closed, was in my view a complete joke, and it provided no way of uploading an actual considered submission. Well, in case you're wondering how I responded to this in my disgust, I copy-pasted the submission that I actually did write and put it in the last box. Because the people who put it up there had forgotten to limit the number of characters you could write in the box, and I bet you they won't make that mistake next time. Now, no doubt my contribution in that box will be dismissed because, quote, it does not answer the question, unquote, and it can therefore be ignored. Now, the Attorney General's Department hasn't even bothered to run this consultation itself. No, of course, it outsourced it, probably at great cost, to a British corporation which is running it. But that's no excuse for the loaded questions and the inadequate opportunity to respond, because it's the department that should have overseen that. And as I also wrote on their form, they ought to do better. There really is no excuse for this appalling level of public consultation. So that is my rant for today. Thank you for watching the Constitutional Clarion, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.